Dan, our project is called the Invisibles. Why did you come up with that name?
Well, essentially because I think both of the populations that we're working with in this project are in fact invisible to a large part of society. When you lose your sometimes your name literally, but you lose your documentation, you lose your work history, you lose your home, and you're in a refugee camp. Essentially, you're invisible to the rest of society. Nobody knows who you are. Literally, you're faceless, nameless. You're invisible. And I think to some degree, the veterans population that we are hoping to help us with this project are in sort of the same shape. They come back from a deployment, and they come back with experiences. They come back sometimes with problems. They come back certainly with attitudes about what happened during that deployment. And we see them when they're in uniform, and we say, we value your service when we see them at the airport. But basically, when they come back into society, they sort of blend in. They become invisible too. And so I think there's a kinship between those two groups, really.
So the opportunity to connect those two groups is what we came up with as a project.
Right.
And the idea is that refugees are in many cases based in a specific place. Lesbos is a place that we've found, and we've
Right.
established a relationship with groups who are working there on the ground.
Right.
And then we established relationships with veteran communities in Houston and other places that are used to going into disaster areas. And when we mentioned the idea of can they be put together in a team to go help these refugees establish an identity, they said, well, this is very much a disaster in the making. And they would organize, and they
Right.
would use their skills in being able to help people build identities because they were trained in counterinsurgency, and they had to go into the villages in many of these places in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and
And figure it out.
and figure it out.
Yeah, yeah.
So what's the framework for establishing identity that we came up with?
Well, I think the basic framework is that we have identified places where information about these individuals might reside, and excuse me, and then we have a series of places we can identify where we can draw information and then pull it into a secure environment online. And the way we've conceived it initially, anyway, is with a couple of different levels that you could self-identify as someone who wanted to go through this process. There would be a process of gathering information from your family, from the people who are in the refugee camp with you, from the archives from where you came, from the screening that happened when you went into the country. All of that stuff you could bring together in an initial dossier, so to speak. And then one of the veterans who's working would then become the monitor and would look at that information, review that information, and when there's a level of satisfaction about the accuracy of that information, then move that into a secure online system that can be used then to look outward and give a face to the person and let them be employed, let them begin building their life again.
So two aspects of that come to mind. The legal framework for getting that trusted identity established, at least we see a lot of work going on in UNCITRAL and other places talking about verifying and authenticating the identity, and that's going to be the role of the monitor, and they
Right.
would have to be able to access information that's available wherever, and then if there are questions about it, there would be processes by which you
Right.
could determine the trustworthiness of
Right.
it. But the other side of it is that why would the refugees want to go through this? And so our groups that we've found on the ground that we're partnering with in Europe and in Greece in particular are at least making employment opportunities available
Right.
with Greek producers. And then there's the possibility of working in the cloud, telemedicine,
Right.
telelaw, telearchitecture, and so forth that could come if the financial technology community gets into the picture as well. And
Right.
we've reached out to them.
Well, and you also have the ability, for example, if you have an identity that is verifiable, you have the identity do things like build a bank account, to begin to have credit, to all the things that people who are not invisible do. You can do once you have an identity, but you
And-
can't do if you don't have an identity.
And whether it's the telecommunications world or the banking world that brings that sort of account to them is going to be an interesting race to see how that develops, because certainly that's the case.
But where we are with the project right now, obviously, is this is a long-term project. This is more than just something you can do at a 2-day hackathon. So what we've developed so far is the framework, the set of requirements, a description of the kinds of functions we would have to have, and we've identified partners who will work on this with us. So we've taken the first steps. The next step is to say, okay, let's begin building piece by piece the system that would allow us to do the intake, to do the gathering of the data, storing the data, verifying the data, and then moving it into that secure environment. So we're on the way.
We're on the way. It's been great working together on
Yeah,
this, as
absolutely.
always.